Resident Evil Village begins with a scene of domestic bliss as our hero Ethan Winters and his wife Mia look after their newborn baby, Rosemary. Then something bad happens. I won't say what because it's pretty shocking, and soon Ethan finds himself lost in an isolated village in a snowstorm searching for his kidnapped child. It's a sharp, sudden intro but an effective one, immediately setting the stakes high and establishing Village's brutal, sadistic tone.
Oh no. They're coming.
It's never explicitly stated where the village the game takes its name from is located, but a few clues point towards it being nestled somewhere in the wintry mountains of Romania. The village itself is a scrappy, ramshackle scattering of wood and brick houses, farmers' fields, and the occasional church. Over it looms a Gothic castle with immense spires, and there are also traces of ancient ruins suggesting a long and strange history. It's a magnificent setting, dripping with atmosphere, menace, and mystery, and a place I wanted to explore every dingy corner of. Ethan is a pretty boring guy who always seems confused about what's going on and never has anything interesting to say. This makes him a slightly unremarkable protagonist, but his extreme normality does heighten the eccentricity of the village's residents. The previous game's Baker family were a relatively grounded bunch of ghouls, but here Capcom has seriously ramped up the monstrousness of its antagonists. As Ethan hunts for Rose, he goes up against an impossibly tall and glamorous vampire, a weird mutant fishman, a killer porcelain doll, and other assorted weirdos. What I love about Village is that it never settles on being just one kind of horror game. Each villain's lair features a very different take on the genre, from breathless, action-packed survival against hordes of enemies, to a more slow-burning, psychological brand of horror. It's a game overflowing with ideas, constantly inventing clever, surprising new ways to raise your heart rate and jolt you out of your comfort zone, and it manages to keep this up for pretty much the entire duration of the game. Each section is so wildly different, Village almost has the feel of a horror anthology. Admittedly, this can make it feel inconsistent at times, as if all the parts are flimsily strung together. You often get the sense that Capcom had the ideas for the game's many brilliant set pieces first, then decided how to connect them all together at the last minute. But it's worth it for the variety this approach offers. You genuinely never know what fresh weirdness the developer is going to throw at you next. This not only makes this the most varied Resident Evil to date, but arguably the scariest. One of the best examples of this is in a creepy mansion owned by one of the rulers of the village. In her creaking, dusty old house, you're forced through a series of wonderfully constructed moments of understated and excruciatingly tense horror, culminating in an encounter that might well be the scariest single moment in Resident Evil history. In another section, you're hunted by Lady Dimitrescu, the aforementioned lofty vampire. Her 15th century castle is an opulent labyrinth of ornate gilded corridors and shadowy drawing rooms, lavishly decorated and softly lit by candles. It's an incredibly atmospheric setting, and the imposing Lady D bearing down on you, crouching to squeeze through doorways that are much too small for her, is thrilling and nerve-wracking. As she pursues, you have to hunt for objects to unlock the main gate and escape, which involves some light puzzling and, in true Resi style, mentally mapping the building. Castle Dimitrescu is perhaps the best showcase of Resident Evil's impressive visuals, but the entire game is just obscenely pretty. The environments are richly detailed and stunningly lit, with a tangible layer of grime and texture to every object and surface. It runs smoothly even at high resolutions, and ray tracing makes for some gorgeous lighting and reflections. The character models are also spectacular, with expressive, convincing animation bringing the cast horribly to life. The castle and mansion are among the series' most memorable set pieces, but I do wish they squeezed a little more out of them. In one sense, I do appreciate how Capcom resists the urge to milk its ideas dry, enthusiastically tossing them aside to present something new to the player. This keeps things feeling fresh and unpredictable throughout. But occasionally I'd reach the end of one of these sections and think, is that it? Sometimes I just wish the game would give me more time to soak it all in before shoving me through to the next room of the haunted house. Elsewhere, the horror is more immediate. While Resident Evil 7 had one type of regular enemy, the sludge-like molded, Village features an array of savage horrors called Lycans. These feral, snarling creatures come in various forms, and you have to regularly switch up your tactics to fight them. The standard grunts aren't overly powerful, but they're agile and athletic, able to leap at you suddenly from a distance and clamber up walls and ladders, which makes for some entertainingly dramatic and fast-paced battles. I found the regular Lycans too cartoonishly werewolf-like to be really scared by them, but later iterations are much more intimidating. There are some really messed up creatures in the latter half of Village, including twitching biomechanical horrors with drills for arms, guys with chunks of rusty metal screwed to them as makeshift armor, and other similarly grim examples of Clive Barker-esque body horror. It makes those sentient blobs of black slime from RE7 seem very lame in comparison. However, the developer seems to have almost entirely lost interest in puzzles. There are a few in Village, but they're extremely easy, with solutions that are always staring you right in the face. As someone who has always enjoyed the arcane, convoluted puzzles in Resident Evil games, I find this slightly disappointing. It does make for a pacier game with fewer interruptions to the flow of exploration and combat, but I like those interruptions, and I feel like Village could have benefited from being a little more cerebrally taxing. I didn't get stuck once in the 11 hours it took me to finish my first playthrough. Ethan has very few allies in the Village, and they tend to die horribly not long after meeting him, but a mysterious character known as the Duke is a constant friendly presence. He's a merchant with a curiously enigmatic personality and always seems to be one step ahead of you. Turn a corner in a new area and you'll find him there, quietly puffing on a cigar and eagerly awaiting your coin. He sells weapons, ammo, crafting blueprints, and other helpful stuff, and will buy any treasure you happen to pick up, including the crystallized remains of bosses. Compared to Resident Evil 7, Village has a much more interesting and open structure. A large square in the center of the village acts as a hub from which all the major locations in the game branch off. Although Resident Evil 7 had the feel of a soft reboot, only lightly touching on the series' larger mythology, Village contains some major revelations that impact every game in the series in hindsight. Village can occasionally feel like half a dozen different horror games jammed together, but the strength and variety of its ideas, the quality of its art direction, and its darkly evocative atmosphere more than make up for it. It's a bold and experimental horror game, but also one that leans into the series' past glories, particularly Resident Evil 4. There's a lot of Shinji Mikami's 2005 reinvention here, from the enigmatic merchant and the weapon upgrades to the rural setting and the corrupted villagers. But ultimately, Village is its own game with its own identity, and the elements it borrows from earlier sequels never define it. This is a quality horror game in its own right, and Proof Resi still has the power to thrill, surprise, and scare 25 years on. This is a grimly beautiful collection of killer horror set pieces, with some of the most memorably grotesque enemies in Resident Evil history.
Let's see how special